We built a dream together when we had nothing and promised to rise side by side. But when my moment finally came, I learned that not everyone can stand with you in the light. They say you can tell when something is going to matter forever. I do not know if that is true, but I do remember the first night I met Claire, and how the world just felt different after that. It was late, way past midnight, and we were both stuck in that crappy diner across from campus. The kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. She was sketching something on a napkin. I was grading my own failure on a laptop that wheezed every time I opened a browser tab. We were the only two in there who were not just killing time. We were trying. Hustling. Barely making rent. Eating cold fries. Surviving on hopes we never said out loud. Somewhere between her fifth refill and my third breakdown, we started talking. About dreams. About how we were both tired of just surviving. She told me she wanted to open her own studio someday. I told her I wanted to build something real, something that would last longer than me. From that night on, we were a we. Not just boyfriend and girlfriend. Not just two people dating. We were teammates. We were dreamers with our backs to the wall, whispering to each other, "We'll make it together." We had nothing, but in those early days, belief felt like everything. We would talk for hours, sometimes until the sun came up, about what we wanted, what we feared, how we would get out of the messes we were born into and carve something new. She believed in me before I believed in myself, and I tried to do the same for her. Rent was always late. Dinners were always cheap. But somehow, we made those moments feel rich. I still remember the night we celebrated hitting $100 in savings like it was a windfall. She danced in our tiny kitchen with no socks on, holding a chipped wine glass filled with orange soda like we had just conquered the world. It was not romantic in the movie sense. We were too tired for romance. But there was something real about it. Something heavy and good. A kind of partnership that made the uncertainty bearable. For a long time, we grew side by side. Equal in struggle, equal in effort, equal in sacrifice. She picked up extra shifts so I could finish coding a project. I walked an hour to work when her car broke down so she could make it to her presentation. That was just how it was. We took turns carrying the weight. But life has a funny way of shifting the ground beneath you when you least expect it. Because not every we lasts forever. And not every love survives what happens when one of you starts to rise. Back then, making it meant surviving the month. It meant paying the electric bill and still having enough left for groceries. We were not chasing fame. We just wanted to breathe without panic. I was working 3 part-time jobs and freelancing on the side. Claire picked up gigs at a local gallery, did commissions on the weekends, and even started babysitting just to keep her head above water. We were not proud, but we were proud of each other. Those late-night talks turned into early morning grinds. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, exhausted and doubting everything. And I would hold her, whispering the same thing we always said, "We'll make it together." Sometimes I said it for her. Sometimes she said it for me. Like we were passing hope back and forth, keeping it alive just long enough to get through another week. One time, I remember her backpack got stolen right out of the laundromat. Her sketchbooks were inside. Months of work, all gone in one moment. She sat in the parking lot on the curb with her head in her hands, and I just stood there, helpless. That night, I stayed up with her and helped redraw every piece she could remember. We laughed at how bad my versions were, but she kept going. Another time, I got rejected by a startup I thought was going to change everything. I locked myself in the bathroom for an hour, just so she would not see how much it broke me. When I came out, she had made pancakes for dinner, shaped like smiley faces, even though we were down to the last of the batter. She kissed my forehead and said, "You are still going to change the world. This was just not your stop." That was us. Always behind the curve, always just a few steps away from giving up, but never letting each other fall. We built our lives like a house of cards, but we built it together. And then something changed. Slowly at first. Subtle. It started with the job interview I did not tell her about. A quiet thing, just in case I failed again. But I did not fail. I nailed it. They offered me a contract. When I told her, I expected a full-body tackle, some kind of celebration. Instead, she just smiled, tight-lipped, and said, "Wow, that's amazing." I did not think much of it at the time. Maybe she was just tired. But then I started noticing the shift. She was not coming to bed when I did. She stayed in the living room late, sketching alone. Some nights I would reach for her in the dark, and her side of the bed was cold. The words, "We'll make it together" started sounding like something we used to say. And then came the email that changed everything. One line, one opportunity, a chance to speak at a conference in Los Angeles. Big names, big exposure, big deal. I turned to tell her, but she was already standing there, holding her phone, staring at something that made her expression twist in a way I had never seen before. She looked up and asked, "What happens to us if you actually become everything you said you would?" At first, I laughed, not because her question was funny, but because it caught me so off guard. What happens to us if you actually become everything you said you would? It sounded like something a stranger would say. Not Claire. Not the girl who used to sit beside me on the fire escape, eating gas station chips and talking about the future like it was something we were building brick by brick. I told her the truth. I said, "Nothing happens to us. We just move forward. Together. Like always." She nodded slowly but said nothing else. Just turned back to her sketch pad like the conversation never happened. That was the first time I felt it. The distance. It was not anger. Not jealousy in the loud, obvious sense. It was quieter than that. Like the air between us had changed weight. I would show her the message thread with the conference organizer, and she would smile without really looking. I would mention an investor meeting coming up, and she would say cool, before disappearing into another room. Meanwhile, I was finally gaining ground. After years of trying and failing, something had started clicking. The app one had been building got featured on a tech blog. A developer I admired reached out. People were asking to meet. For the first time, doors were opening. And every time I came home excited, it felt like I had to dim it down. Like she could only handle my joy in small doses. I tried to be patient, tried not to see it as resentment. I figured she just needed time. Maybe she was feeling left behind. Maybe I had not done a good job showing her that I still saw her as my partner. So I doubled down. I took her out to dinner at that little Thai place we used to dream about going to when we had money. I booked the same corner table. She smiled, even laughed a little when we sat down. But the light in her eyes felt guarded. I told her I wanted her to come with me to LA. I said we could make a trip out of it. Some time away, new energy, maybe even connect with art folks out west. She set down her fork and asked me why I was bringing her. Not do you want me to come, but why? I told her the truth again. Because we have always done everything together. Because this matters. And because I want you by my side. She stared at me like I had said the wrong thing. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "It used to feel like our dream. Now it just feels like your spotlight." I sat there frozen, hearing the words echo louder than the music playing over the restaurant speakers. We paid the check in silence. Walked back to the apartment hand in hand. But it felt like two people holding on for balance, not closeness. And when I opened the door to our place, something felt off. Her sketchbooks were gone from the living room table, and one of the suitcases was missing from the closet. The suitcase was the first thing I saw. At first, I told myself maybe she was reorganizing. Claire liked to declutter when she was anxious. But then I checked the drawer where she kept her chargers, sketch pencils, and old journals, the one she used to call her brain drawer. Empty. My chest got tight. I called her name. No answer. She was not in the bedroom, not on the balcony, not in the building laundry room. I even knocked on the neighbor's door, hoping maybe she had just stepped out for air. But I knew. I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the dent her pillow had left. Her side of the closet was half cleared. Not completely, just enough to say I need space, without saying it out loud. She had not left me. Not officially, but she had stepped away. She came back the next morning like nothing had happened. Said she was staying with a friend for a few days. Just needed time to think. To clear her head. I asked her why. She shrugged. Said things felt off. That she was proud of me. So proud. But lately, she did not know where she fit in all this anymore. And just like that, our story, the one built on late nights and cold fries and whispered promises, started to come apart at the seams. The weird thing was, she never said she was unhappy. Not directly. She did not yell or accuse or storm out. It was slower. Like she was quietly rewriting our story in her head, and I was no longer the main character. One night, a few weeks later, she stopped by the apartment to pick up more clothes. We ended up talking on the floor, leaning against opposite walls. The place still smelled like her lavender laundry soap. She asked how the LA trip went. I told her it went well. Better than expected. I landed a partnership. There was talk of funding. Maybe even scaling. She smiled, but her eyes flickered. Then she said something I could not shake. She said, "You know, Some people fall in love with who you are on the way up, not who you become once you get there. That hit me like a brick. She was not even trying to be cruel. It was just a thought she had, dropped in the middle of our living room like it was not explosive. And she was right, partly. The struggle had made us equals. We were teammates when the game was tied. But now that I was finally pulling ahead, it was like I had broken some unspoken rule. I started questioning everything. Had I gotten too wrapped up in my goals? Had I stopped seeing her? Or had she just decided that my dream was no longer our dream? Then one night, I got a message from someone I did not recognize. A DM, simple, casual. It said, "You probably don't know me, but Claire's been crashing on my couch. She talks about you a lot. Thought you should know she's not doing great." It was signed with a name I had never heard before. And that was when I realized. Claire had not just stepped away from me. She had stepped toward someone else. I did not respond to the message right away. I stared at my phone for a long time, rereading it until the words started to blur. Claire crashing on someone else's couch. Talking about me. Not doing great. None of it sounded like betrayal on the surface, but it felt like a door quietly closing somewhere behind me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Claire had always made friends easily. She leaned on people when she felt lost. That was part of who she was. Still, there was something about the timing that made my stomach turn. I asked her about it a few days later, as calmly as I could. I did not accuse her. I did not raise my voice. I just asked who she was staying with now. She hesitated, just for a second, long enough for me to notice. She said it was a group of people. Artists. Creatives. People who understood her. She said it like that last part mattered more than anything else. I nodded and pretended it did not sting. Around that time, my life started accelerating in ways I had dreamed about for years. Meetings turned into contracts. Contracts turned into real money. Not lottery money, not fantasy money, but enough to breathe. Enough to stop checking my bank account every morning with dread. Everyone around me noticed the change. Friends I had not heard from in years suddenly wanted coffee. Family members started asking questions about my work with a tone that sounded suspiciously like pride. Claire noticed too. She started texting more, checking in, asking how my days were going. Sometimes she would swing by the apartment unannounced, sit on the couch like she used to, and ask me to tell her everything. But something was off. When I talked about my wins, her reactions came half a second too late. Her smiles felt practiced. She would celebrate just enough to seem supportive, then quietly change the subject back to her own frustrations. She talked about feeling stuck, about how her art felt invisible now, about how watching me move forward made her question everything she had done with her time. I tried to reassure her. I reminded her that her work mattered, that she mattered, that this was just a season. But I could tell something darker was brewing underneath. One night, she admitted something that caught me completely off guard. She said she missed when we were both struggling. She did not say it cruelly. She said it like a confession, like a truth she had been carrying alone for too long. She said life felt simpler back then, clearer, like we were standing on the same ground, looking in the same direction. I asked her if my success scared her. She did not answer right away. Then she said she was afraid of disappearing in my shadow. That was when it hit me. She did not see my growth as proof that our sacrifices had meant something. She saw it as a threat to the balance that had defined us. And the worst part was this. She was not trying to pull me down. She was waiting to see if I would step back on my own. The next morning, I woke up to another message from the same unknown number. This one was shorter. It said, "She cries every time you leave. She just does not know how to say goodbye." And in that moment, I realized the question was no longer whether Claire could handle my success. The question was whether I was willing to make myself smaller so she would not have to. For weeks, I tried to carry both. The momentum I had waited years for, and the relationship that once meant everything to me. I told myself I could be both things, the man who was growing and the man who never left her behind. I scaled back meetings, turned down a few press spots, and even skipped a networking event I had dreamed of just to make time for Claire. I told myself it was temporary, that she just needed to feel seen again. But the truth was, I was shrinking. Not because she asked me to, because I thought that if I got too bright, she might disappear completely. One night, I left a meeting early, a big one. I was supposed to grab drinks with potential investors, people who had flown in just to talk about the future of my company. Instead, I walked out after the presentation, picked up takeout from her favorite spot, and brought it to the apartment. Claire was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching something with music playing softly in the background. She looked peaceful. For a minute, I felt like maybe this was working. Maybe the sacrifices were worth it. We ate in silence, then watched some old show we used to love. Her head rested on my shoulder. It felt warm, familiar. But then she asked me, almost casually, why I did not mention the meeting. I told her I had skipped the drinks, that I wanted to be with her. She smiled. That same tired smile. The one that said thank you, and I did not ask for this all at once. It took me a few days to admit what was really going on. I was not building my life anymore. I was managing her fear. Every move I made felt like a step onto thin ice. Too much excitement, and she would go quiet. Too much ambition, and she would withdraw. I stopped talking about milestones. I downplayed the opportunities. I softened my own joy to keep things balanced. But balance does not mean walking in circles. One evening, I caught her looking through an old box of photos. Back when we first met, when we were broke and hungry and filled with fire. She held one up of us at that diner, both of us wearing jackets 3 sizes too big, smiling like fools who had no idea how hard life was about to get. She said something under her breath. Something like, I miss those days. I asked her why. She looked at me and said, because back then, I knew exactly where I stood with you. That night, I stayed up thinking about those words, turning them over like puzzle pieces that refused to fit. She knew where she stood with me when I had nothing. But now that I had something to lose, it felt like she was afraid of being left behind. Like my success had become a threat to her place in my life. And I hated that, because I never saw her as someone I needed to outgrow. She had always been the reason I made it through the hardest years. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like she was rooting for me, and started feeling like she was keeping score. Then something happened that pulled it all into focus. I was asked to speak on a panel in New York, short notice, but a massive opportunity. The kind that only comes once, if you are lucky. When I told her, I expected hesitation. Instead, she just stared at me and said, do you have to go? Not that is amazing. Not I am proud of you. Just, do you have to? I stood there for a long time, trying to find the right words. Something gentle, something understanding. But the silence stretched too far. And that was when she asked the one question that changed everything. She looked up at me, almost like she was bracing for the answer. And she said, if this is who you are now, is there even room for me? I did not answer right away. What could I say? Yes, there is room for you, but only if you stop pulling away every time I win. No, there is no room, because you are not the same person who believed in me when I was nothing. Both felt cruel, and both felt partly true. Claire was watching me closely. Her eyes were not angry. They were tired. The kind of tired you cannot sleep off. Like she had been carrying the weight of doubt for too long, and now she needed me to carry the truth. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. So she stood up, quietly, like she already knew. I think you've already answered, she said. Not bitter, just hollow. She packed a few more things that night. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No tears. Just a soft kind of ending that felt worse than any blowout ever could. Before she walked out, she stopped at the door and looked back. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear. I never wanted to be the reason you held back, she said. But I also do not think I know how to follow you into a world that stopped feeling like mine. Then she left. And just like that, the chapter we had written together, 4 years of belief, sacrifice, and shared hunger, closed without a final sentence. For a few days, I could barely breathe. I moved through the apartment like a ghost. Her presence still lived in every corner. Her half-burned candles. Her notes in the margins of old sketchbooks. Even the tiny cactus by the windowsill that she always forgot to water, but I never did. I kept thinking maybe she would come back. That this was just a pause. That she needed space, not distance. But a week passed. Then 2. And then the truth came, quiet but undeniable. Some people love you most when you are becoming, not when you arrive. Because becoming is vulnerable. It is messy. It is equal footing. It is 2 people reaching for something with empty hands. But arriving? That shifts everything. When you grow, when your voice gets louder, your steps more certain, some people do not feel inspired by that. They feel erased. And Claire, she did not know how to stand in the light with me. She only knew how to walk with me through the dark. I was not mad at her for that. Honestly, I got it. Not everyone can watch someone else rise without asking what it says about their own reflection. Still, I kept hoping the story was not over. That maybe one day, She would call. Maybe we would meet at that same diner, years later, older and softer, and laugh about the chaos of it all. But life does not always give you the second act you are hoping for. Until one morning, I got a letter in the mail. No name on the return address, just a folded note inside. 5 words, handwritten in ink I recognized. I finally get it now. I stared at the note for a long time. It was not dramatic, just 5 simple words. I finally get it now. No explanation, no apology, no I miss you. Just that. I turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. No date. No return address. Just the handwriting I knew by heart. Curved and careful, the way she always wrote when something mattered. For a moment, I thought about calling her. I even pulled up her name on my phone. But I stopped. Because I finally understood something too. That note was not an invitation. It was a release. It was her way of saying she knew she could not follow me where I was going. But she no longer blamed me for going anyway. I sat on the floor of our old apartment, the same spot where we used to plan our future, surrounded by memories that still smelled like her, and I let it sink in. She loved me the best she could. But real love does not ask you to shrink. It does not flinch when you shine. It learns how to stand in the light with you, proudly, not behind you, not below you, but beside you. For a long time, I used to think love meant carrying each other through the storm. And it does, partly. But what no one tells you is that sometimes the real test comes after the rain stops, when the sun comes out, and only one of you knows how to stand in it. That was Claire's struggle, not because she was weak, not because she was selfish, but because, for her, our struggle was the glue, the bond, the proof that we were in it together. When that struggle ended for me, she did not know where that left her. And as much as I wanted to bring her with me, she needed to figure out who she was without me before she could ever walk beside me again. The next day, I did something I had been avoiding. I went to the gallery she used to work at. Some of her new pieces were hanging in the back room. I had not seen them since she moved out. They were different, bolder, angrier in some ways, but clearer too. One of them caught me by surprise, a canvas covered in deep reds and dark brush strokes, shaped like a silhouette walking through fire. Beneath it, in tiny letters, was the title, Becoming Light. I smiled, because I knew it was not about me. It was about her. She was becoming, too, in her own way, in her own time. And that was when I realized. The real ending of our story was not heartbreak. It was transformation. But there was still one more choice left to make. Because sometimes, knowing the truth is not enough. Sometimes you have to decide whether to carry it forward or finally let go. The next few weeks felt like walking through echoes. Everywhere I went, there was a reminder. The cafe where we planned our first website. The bookstore where she once surprised me with a journal and said, "This is where you'll write your future." The park bench we used to crash on after long walks. Back when walking was all we could afford. I kept wondering if she would show up again. Not in the dramatic way, just quietly. Maybe I would see her across the street. Maybe she would stop by just to see the life we used to build. Maybe that note was her way of reaching out, soft and subtle, hoping I would reach back. But she never did. And deep down, I knew why. That note was not a question. It was an answer. And I had to decide what I wanted to do with it. I thought about reaching out anyway. I pictured the words I would say. Something about forgiveness. About growth. About how even though we ended, it did not mean we failed. But every version of that conversation ended the same way. With me asking her to catch up to where I was now. And that was the part one could not ignore anymore. Because I had worked too hard, fought too long, to finally feel like myself. And I realized something I had not been ready to say until now. I was not going to dim my light just to make someone else feel comfortable in the shadows. Even if I loved them, even if it hurt. That is not strength. That is fear. I had lived in fear before. Fear of losing her, of losing what we had built, of becoming someone too big for the life we started in. But now, that fear was gone. I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at the man I had become. The lines under my eyes. The small scars from late nights and harder lessons. The fire in my chest that had not gone out, even when everything else tried to put it out. And I made a choice. I was not going to fold myself in half to keep the peace. I was not going to apologize for wanting more. Because real love does not ask you to shrink to stay safe. It learns how to grow beside you, or it lets you go with grace. The next morning, I picked up her note again, ran my fingers across those 5 words one last time. Then I folded it up and slipped it back into the envelope. Not to return it, not to reread it later, but to bury it, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because some goodbyes do not need a response. They just need to be honored. And as I dropped the envelope into the fire pit behind my building and watched the corners curl into flame, I finally let go of the question that had haunted me for months. What if we had stayed together? Because the truth? We already had, for as long as we were meant to. The morning after I burned the letter, I woke up early. No alarms, no meetings, just the quiet kind of morning that lets you hear your own breath. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city start to move. For the first time in a long time, there was no weight on my chest, no knot in my stomach, just space. Space she once filled. Space I had been afraid to admit was better left open. I thought back to who I was when we met, scared, broke, desperate for something to believe in. She gave me that. Claire believed in me when I was nothing but potential wrapped in failure. When the world said not yet, she said keep going. I will never forget that. But love is not just about the people who lift you up. Sometimes, it is about the people who know when to step away, so you can finally stand tall. Claire helped me survive, but I helped myself grow. That is the part one never saw until now. I thought we were two halves making a whole. But the truth is, we were two full people trying to walk the same path. Until the road split. And that is okay. I do not hate her for needing things I could not give anymore. I do not blame her for missing the struggle, for feeling lost when the dream started turning real. Not everyone is built for the arrival. Some are built for the climb. She was one of them. But me? I was built for the summit. And I finally understood that loving someone does not mean choosing them over yourself. It means honoring what you built together and still walking forward, even if they cannot follow. That afternoon, I got an email. A speaking invite. A bigger one. Bigger stage, bigger crowd. 5 years ago, I would have read that message to Claire out loud, pacing the apartment, planning what we would wear, what we would say. Now, I read it alone. And instead of feeling hollow, I smiled. Because some dreams are meant to be shared. And others are meant to remind you who you are when no one is clapping. I hit accept and shut the laptop. Stepped outside into the light. And this time, I did not look back.